South Korea's embattled leader Yoon Suk Yeol has been arrested, capping more than 6 weeks of political and legal turmoil, stemming from his short-lived imposition of martial law last month. He is the nation's first sitting president to be detained. Mr. Yoon skipped the opening of his impeachment trial yesterday. He has remained defiant and is reportedly refusing to speak to anti-graft officials or to have his interviews with investigators recorded on video.
The latest attempt to arrest Yoon Suk Yeol began before dawn, with thousands of South Korean police officers swarming his residence. Armed with ladders and wire cutters, they pushed past his supporters to reach the gates of the compound in Seoul. Minor scuffles reportedly broke out between pro-Yoon supporters and police near the building. The unprecedented move comes after a previous failed attempt on the 3rd of January, when Presidential Security Service and military guards blocked anti-graft officials from detaining him in a 6-hour standoff. In a video message recorded before his detention, Mr. Yoon claimed the country's law had collapsed and that he was submitting himself for questioning to avoid any violence.
저는 오늘 이들이 이 경호 보안 구역을 소방 장비를 동원해서 침입해 들어오는 것을 보고 불미스러운 유혈 사태를 막기 위해서 일단 불법 수사이긴 하지만 공수처 출석에 응하기로 했습니다. 그러나 제가 이 공수처의 수사를 인정하는 것은 아닙니다.
His presidential motorcade left the residence shortly after, taking him to the country's anti-corruption agency. Investigators now have less than 48 hours to interrogate him on charges of insurrection. After that, they must release the embattled leader or seek an arrest warrant to detain him for a longer period of time.
CNA's Grace Shin has more on how lawmakers and South Korean society have reacted to the arrest of the president.
For the first time ever, South Korea's sitting president has been arrested, but this simple news headline may be rebuked by many South Koreans. And suspended President Yoon Suk Yeol and his legal team have been emphasizing that Mr. Yoon's decision to head to the anti-corruption agency's headquarters for questioning was simply to evade bloodshed. It was not because they agreed this was a formal legal investigation. Therefore, they're claiming that today's arrest wasn't an official arrest. Instead, it was Yoon voluntarily appearing in front of the CIO. And on that note, the ruling People Power Party criticized the CIO for pushing through what they also determined as an illegal investigation. Lawmakers throughout the day who talked to media mentioned how it wasn't a surprise that President Yoon denied any statements during questioning. They said this was only reasonable since the CIO does not have the investigative authority for a grave charge like insurrection. According to South Korean law, those indicted with insurrection can face up to the death penalty. And the PPP condemned the CIO of being the opposition bloc's, quote, hired help. The party's senior spokesperson, Shin Dong-wook, released a commentary saying the people will hold the CIO responsible for its unlawful actions because today's arrest warrant seemingly was executed for political show and not for the purpose of unraveling the truth. And among the public, that's what a lot of Yoon's avid conservative supporters are saying as well. They're calling the CIO communist and are backing his martial law imposition as a way to prevent South Korea from being handed over to North Korea. Also, a growing number of youth seemingly are siding with Yoon, as suggested from many public polls, or at least aren't agreeing to his arrest just yet, claiming that he hasn't been officially indicted. On the contrary, the opposition bloc and those among the public in favor of Yoon's impeachment have been hailing the arrest of Yoon. They called it the first step toward restoring constitutional order, democracy, and rule of law. The Democratic Party's floor leader, Park Chan-dae, noted how the arrest came a bit too late. Though he mentioned how it's fortunate to see justice in South Korea restored, he also said it's common sense for a South Korean citizen who commits a crime to be tested under the fairness and rule of law, and also receive appropriate punishment, which is why a lot of supporters who want President Yoon to be impeached are demanding. So you can see, depending on how one is perceiving the CIO's arrest warrant and Yoon appearing for questioning, different vernacular is used, and that just reflects how polarized the country is in terms of public sentiment or the political parties when it comes to viewing the political turmoil that has been ongoing in South Korea.
We stay in South Korea. The Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials has until 10:33 a.m. Friday local time to build a case against President Yoon Suk Yeol. After the deadline, the CIO will have to decide whether it wants to seek a formal arrest warrant to detain him for up to 20 days. If it does not do that, it has to release Mr. Yoon, who will then be free to return to the presidential residence. A legal expert say there is a high chance that the CIO will seek the 20-day formal arrest warrant, which should be issued if enough evidence can be found of a crime having been committed, or if there is a risk of evidence being destroyed or of the suspect leaving the country before trial. The CIO earlier agreed to transfer the case to state prosecutors within the first 10 days of detention. That leaves prosecutors to decide whether or not to indict Mr. Yoon on insurrection. The State Prosecutor's Office is the only agency that has the authority to indict a sitting president. If it decides in favor of that, and should courts uphold that decision, a criminal trial will then be triggered. This could end with Mr. Yoon having to pay a heavy fine, facing a life sentence, or, although very unlikely, the death penalty.